Hello and welcome to another episode of Owl Bear Soup.
I'm so excited for this one because I love waking up in the morning. Like Sunday mornings, nice, calm, relaxing, get some coffee, like think about what's the D&D going to be for today, and then immediately like diving into horror. It's been a
Yeah,
fun 2 weeks.
yeah. Horror's always been one of my favorite genres. Just in general, I've always loved horror, and I think I think to me, you know how people have that place in their hearts for comedy, where they they
Sure,
they love to
sure.
watch comedy because it's the endorphins, it's a good time, all that
hmm
stuff.
hmm
I
Yeah.
think I feel like I'm the same way with horror. But the cheesier the better. Like
Oh yeah.
I could definitely spend an entire afternoon watching like a horror movie after horror movie just because the genre itself is so much fun for me. Um, you know,
That's fair. That's
especially
fair. Yeah.
yeah, especially with things
No, I'm
like
just curious where
Cabin in
you
the
would hit.
Woods, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of the horror movie aficionados horror movie where it's just kind of
Cool.
playing with all the tropes and turning it on its head a little bit.
Yeah, here's my question. Do you watch that first and then like watch all the tropes in order afterwards, or do you
Oh,
watch it at the end to kind of put it all together?
yeah, I think for me, if I were to do a horror movie marathon, I would put that at the beginning to kind of ease into it.
Okay.
And
hmm
then probably after that, I would go with the remake of Evil Dead,
Okay.
because I didn't like the original Evil Dead. I liked Evil Dead 2, which I thought Evil Dead 2 was a ton of fun. Um,
Yeah,
in
the more
Army of
comedy
Darkness,
driven
right?
version.
In Army of Darkness was kind of tough, but I just Evil Dead was I think Sam Raimi, right? And he was
Yeah.
testing the ground and trying to establish this universe. And I feel like the sequel just it knew what it or not sequel the remake knew what it was
Mhm.
from the get go, and they did a very effective job. Um, and then
Yeah.
that seems like the most natural progression from Cabin in the Woods is to go into that because it's a very similar story. They go
Mhm.
to the Cabin in the Woods, things go goofy, right? And then you have to figure out what's the next genre that they're
Right.
hitting, and in this one they're hitting on the rednecks and bumpkins subgenre,
Mhm.
and so then I think the next one would be either The Hills Have Eyes, the Texas
Oh,
Chainsaw Massacre,
sure.
one of the Rob Zombie horror films. If
Mhm.
I was going to do it, I would try to pick the various tropes that I saw in the movie and then do it in that order.
See, I love that because in my head I was thinking you go to Tucker and Dale, and
Okay.
then you go with the college kids, and then you move into like the college kids genre,
Yeah, yeah,
which either one of those routes is fun and would lead you all sorts of places.
absolutely. Yeah, I love the college kid genre. Especially whenever you look at things like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream,
hmm
and
hmm
and those are teetering on the edge of slasher flicks, which I mean they are
Sure.
slasher flicks. Like, but the teenage genre like just fits so well with the slasher flicks. So your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Street. Um, but then I think I wrap it up with a couple of the anthology style horror films. So like Trick or
Okay.
Treat, or
Mm.
let's see, what was the one that Stephen King did? It wasn't Tales from the Crypt, but it was very similar to that. I don't remember now, but
I don't know.
yeah, I like the ones that are like three or four stories like in one movie, and then but they're all slightly tied together. Trick or Treat does an amazing job
Oh,
of
I
that.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
hmm
Um, Yes, I think there is a Tales from the Crypt one that does that, like Tales from the Hood, right? Which is a
Gotcha.
comedy one. That one also is more of the anthology style storytelling, which is a ton of fun. And then there's things like the A to Z's of horror, which is 26 shorts, and each one is a slightly
Okay.
different style of horror. One starting at A, going all the way to Z.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun. Uh,
It's a
I'm
genre I
thinking
spend a
about
little bit
that
of time in.
versus like, oh yeah, thinking about that versus the fight the monster manual D&D adventures.
Right, right. And I mean, Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of news this week. I know typically we kick off with little news, but it's Halloween, so I'm excited to talk about horror movies.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, you could totally do an A to Z style adventure, creature of the week type of thing with the Monster Manual. Um, yeah, and I would just do that, right? Like I would find
Hmm.
one in A, find one in B, go all the way through, try to
Hmm.
make the leveling up appropriate. So maybe they level after each, uh, you know, maybe after the first couple, and then it slows down a little to the end. So they're level 20 for
Right.
when you get to Z. And not that there's a big Z level 20 monster that I can think of, except maybe
I
Zigamati.
I mean, you could easily make up a zompocalypse. I think that's the
Yeah.
level 26 you want to hit.
Yeah, yeah, you have to deal with a huge zombie apocalypse and
Zom.
oh,
Yeah,
there you
that
are.
would be a lot of fun. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you cut out for just a second, but yeah, zombie
Oh,
apocalypse.
no.
I love the idea of like swarms it being one of
Mhm.
the horror style challenges, which is a very zombie one. But I've
Yeah.
also thought about it in the realm of like space alien monsters or even Tremors 3, I think, is more. I like that swarm because in that one they had the monsters that the graboids that came out of the ground and
Uh-huh.
chased people, and you could use those kinds of things as in swarm tactics where the humans are being
Oh, yeah.
hunted down, and it's not like each individual creature is massively powerful. It's just that there's so many of them, right?
Oh, ooh, I like that. That's given me what was that movie? Edge of Tomorrow vibes
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit. I love that swarm. That's
exactly.
terrifying.
Yeah, Edge of Tomorrow, Live Die Repeat. Yeah, like
Yeah.
the alien invasion, although sci-fi, can be very horror, and
Hmm.
that's a cool genre to bring into D&D too.
Yeah.
I have quite a collection of Warhammer minis. Specifically 40K, and I have a lot of what are called Tyranids. In one
Oh, yeah.
campaign idea I had, exactly right. You know where I'm going with this,
Hmm.
is that it was almost Starship Troopers esque, where your party is in Waterdeep or something, and then something
Yeah.
crashes into part of Waterdeep, and then all these creatures. And I was going to use the Xenos from the Tyranids army, and just have a crap ton of them on the table at all times, like you know,
Right.
and that that does a good job of creating that tension, the build,
Hmm.
the horror, and then the true horror, of course, right? Because if you pay attention to what we talked to last week, where there's the slow build up, and then there's the down, then the build up, and then the down, and then the
Hmm.
true horror comes, and then
Right.
and then it kind of eases off a little bit, and that's when you bring in like your big Carnifex. Flex or something like that, the big huge monster. So when
Yeah.
you're looking at Starship Troopers, it's like, oh no, we landed on this planet. It was a trap, right? That's
Yeah.
that's where the horror comes in. That's where the
Hmm.
excitement comes in. That's where the fun comes
Right.
in.
And
So
it's not like you can sit down and like, well, let's leave one alive and interrogate it because it's going to speak common and tell us everything that's going on, right? That's
right,
not part of that story. There is some sense that our scientists are going to try and figure it out, but that's going to be like missions in the future that we start to learn what's happening. And then it's not player agency, it's built into the plot of now you get the big horror. So I
yeah,
love that to give that fear of the unknown like right to our players.
yeah. The idea of the hive mind, I think, works
Mm,
really well when you're thinking about intimidation, right? Because
yeah.
you take one piece of the hive mind away, it's not going to have any information for you.
Mm-mm.
It's going to be a set of like 10 ones and zeros, right? That's its portion of the code,
Right.
and so you take that chunk and you learn nothing,
Hmm.
right? And then you have to kind of deduce by the way they're acting, like what's going on with them and that type of stuff. Anyway, it's a campaign I've thought about running a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a really fun kind of sci-fi horror D&D
Hmm.
conglomerate mix hot mess of stuff.
Yeah. And I would want it to be, pulpy, right? We're pushing through high level play, so we're hitting a level like every time, you're
Hmm.
just boom, boom, boom. This threat is huge. Elminster is like, I'm gonna help you.
Yeah,
You take care of this.
yeah, and especially like Waterdeep, right?
Mhm.
You have to have the powerful characters in these pre-existing areas preoccupied. What are they preoccupied,
Yeah.
right? What is Elminster doing right now? Why isn't he preventing this invasion? And that
Right.
could be part of the story too, right? Because then you're
Mhm.
tapping into that hopelessness where your heroes are, you're unable to get the heroes
Oh.
in to help you out.
Mhm.
You have to be the heroes because there's no one else.
Okay, I've got live die repeat on the brain right now.
I love that
But
movie.
what if you have that some sort of ability where your characters got hit somehow at the start, like during the initial invasion moment, and you are somehow connected to them, and that's your
Hmm.
whole deal, and everybody else, Elminster just can't.
Right.
There's some limitation that character has. You could build that in. It gives your heroes that sense of destiny, which is always a problem in a game, but would be a fun way to have all those other like ancillary characters trying
Hmm.
to help you stop a threat.
Yeah, I mean, you could tap into like a little bit of the mutant kind of horror
Mhm.
genres with that as well, where
Yeah.
maybe a certain part of the population got infected by a virus or something from these
Mhm.
creatures, and it turns out like the only people who can really like make headway in fighting them are people who are infected. But some of these people who have
Yeah.
gotten infected are also, just went the opposite way, where now their allegiance is to these creatures, or maybe they're just like the mutants
Oh.
from the sewers that pop out on occasion, and maybe they just have
Mhm.
body pieces from these creatures, and that's part of it, right? That's why Elminster can't help. The heroes are people who were infected, and maybe you get a
Mhm.
sweet bonus because of it, right? Like,
Mhm.
you could come up with some cool ideas, use feats, kind of get excited about the way it works,
Right. Oh
and
yeah. See, I would dig into those corruption
s-
mechanics we were talking about last
yeah,
week.
exactly. Right. So if one of your PCs die, well, you've already set up that, they aren't the only ones with this destiny.
Right. Mhm.
They are just a lot of people could be these heroes, but these just happen
Yeah.
to be the ones that happen to be together right now. And if we lose
Mhm.
one, we could gain another. We could gain more. We could lose almost the entire party and just still tell the story.
Right. And so now suddenly my next character rises from the sewers, and instead of wielding a battle axe, has this like huge uh like scale covered arm that is just one solid axe.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been
Exactly.
infected. I've got like scales and armored plates coming up my neck. I'm just super corrupted by this thing, but ready to fight.
Yeah, yeah, you have an axe for a hand, so you can't use like bows, right? That's a restriction, but you can't be
Mhm. Yeah.
disarmed.
Right?
Maybe you have a natural armor class, or maybe the scales give you a bonus to your armor class, like even if it's small bonus, like a +1, right? So it kind
Sure.
of balances out, and it feels cool while at the same time you have this restriction that makes things interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, and it's your offhand that you have left, and so your signature is garbage, and you have disadvantage in
Right.
range checks to throw things, right? But you have
I
this
thought you were going to say signing checks.
yeah, 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 yeah. You have disadvantage when signing checks.
It's true.
Oh man. Man, so it's by the way, I am one of your hosts. I'm Justin.
Oh, I'm Rich. I'm your other host. Hello.
Yeah, just kind of jumped into it this week. It's a very exciting time of the year for me, and horror is very exciting for me. So I was very excited to just kind of just dive into it, just get going.
I mean, yeah, this is the kind of like adventure style. Whenever I think about D&D and kind of the horror campaign, I never think about it as long term, right? It is
Hmm.
this thing that will exist, and then we're going to complete this story, and then poof, we're probably going to move on to a different story.
Yeah,
Because it's just the horror thing. Your characters move on with their lives, or they're all destroyed by the evil. I don't know. But it is a short term. It's an affair. It's an event.
hmm, yeah. Well, and you think about horror, like in modern horror. When we're talking horror, we're talking film, specifically. Like in modern horror, you have the sequel, and that's a beloved thing in the horror genre, right? Some other genres like action or sci-fi or romance or true crime, or not true crime, but cops and robbers, like
Right.
sometimes the sequels get progressively worse. Horror, that's not necessarily true, right? Like,
Mhm.
yes, they do, but at the same time, they tend to lean into what made them a lot more, and it
Right.
becomes more
Right.
accepted in horror, right? So the original Friday the 13th, or actually, let's go back. The original Nightmare on Elm Street, like I like this example better, was scary, right? Freddy Krueger
Mhm.
wasn't the wise cracking creepy monster. He was this horrifying creature, but something about him caught on, and then he's slowly, like, in 2 and 3 and so on and so on, he slowly developed this personality where he's this wisecracking kind of horror creature that likes to torture teenagers.
Hmm.
And and so you can do that with even with your D&D horror, is you can say, okay, from level 1 to 5 we're doing this horror. Oh, but they come back.
Yeah.
And then maybe you take a
Right.
break, you you maybe run another short campaign, something, but then you come back for part 2 where you pick up where you're with whatever character survived, right?
Hmm.
Because there's got to be one has to survive to tell the story. And and
I
then
love
it
it.
all all happens again. But you as the DM get to figure out what was really fun about that first one, and it just
Mhm.
lean into it, right?
Just
Yeah,
build it up.
right.
Oh, now I'm thinking about this first idea we had with this saving from the alien invasion, whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
I love the idea that Elminster takes all your characters and is like, well, you all live here now. You live in. We're going to give you this town. Thank you. And like next year, calls on that town again. Like, all
Yeah,
right, they're back.
exactly. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, Elminster comes back to Mutant Town, right?
It's awful. That's all awful. But like,
Yeah,
I love it
it is.
for giving us that level of continuity that your characters could come back. We could just like the game could end, but next year I could be like, do you still have those character sheets? Because I have a new plan.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the joys of like using D&D Beyond too, right? You can just save those character sheets forever.
Yeah.
So, oh man, I'm excited to run this invasion horror now, right? It sounds like a ton of fun.
Yeah, it does.
So and I guess we had talked a little bit about ahead of time what we were going to talk about, and I think we've already started to dive into what I had planned on talking about, but let's
Mhm,
let's make sure to insert some mechanics here too as we're talking. So
mhm.
what I've come up with is kind of a list of horror genres and subgenres, primary genres or subgenres.
Mhm.
Is your gore and disturbing, your psychological, your killer, your monster, and your paranoia.
Sure.
Paranormal. So those kind of feel like the primary ones. Um, in the gore and disturbing side of things, torture porn not super easy to do in your D&D game.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
there might be some other settings that you could do. Your hostel or your Saw makeover. Um,
Right.
yeah, splatter is okay. But that's that kind of leans into the revenge side of things.
It
But
messes up your gaming table.
it
It's
does, it does, it does, it does. But cannibal, I think there's some room for cannibal, right?
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, if we were going to, and I'm going to kind of go through these. I'm going to just try to come up with a couple ideas of like a couple adventures, maybe a
Yeah.
campaign type of thing. But the cannibal one is pretty interesting in that. So the idea of the cannibal is if you've seen Tucker Dale is redneck. Who is a cannibal one? The Hills Have Eyes, I believe, is cannibal. Texas Chainsaw Massacre borders on cannibal.
Right. Right.
Zombies kind of are cannibal, but they're also kind of monsters, right? So the
Yeah.
idea is you're stuck somewhere, and there are these cannibals who are hunting you down. Right, I think you could do this in D&D, right? I
Mhm.
think maybe your PCs end up. We can make it super basic. Your PCs are in the woods traversing from Waterdeep to Baldur's Gate, or Candlekeep to Waterdeep, and they get lost in the woods and
Mhm.
they're getting hunted down, right?
Exactly. Like just maybe one of their NPCs, someone to start the story off, gets captured in the night by these super stealthy cannibals. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
um, oh my god, I'm thinking right now about a sequence in Six String Samurai, one of my favorite like
Uh-huh.
cult movies. There is a horror sequence right in the middle of it involving cannibals, and there is like this family that they meet in the wastelands out in the middle of nowhere. Like we can go post-apocalyptic for a lot of cannibal
Yeah.
stories,
Oh yeah.
and they as they're eating dinner, they're starting to look at the food. They realize that there's this kid as one of the characters, and one of the cannibals is kind of sizing that kid up to see if they've got some fat on them bones.
Hmm.
And it's a really creepy moment. They realize they have to get out of there real fast, and things get hectic pretty quick.
Yeah, that's almost
It's
it's
a cool
almost a
sequence.
it's almost a Hansel. You could do the Hansel and Gretel story too, right? Like
Hmm.
the heroes are lost. They find a kind old man who says, "Well, there's a storm coming. Why don't you stay with me and my family?" And then things start to slowly get weird, and then you can kind of build on
Yeah.
that creepy side of horror as opposed to the being hunted side of horror, where it's like, huh,
Yes.
things are a little
Yes.
little off. What's up with this finger bone that I found in the kitchen? Things like
Hmm.
that, and then you could build up the mystery that leads to the horror too. So yeah,
Right.
Cannibal's kind of
So
fun.
here's I want to throw this out here because I find that in a lot of these scenes I want to make it even weirder. I want to use spells that we never get a chance to see in play.
Yeah,
Like, some of our big illusion spells, like, as we're talking about this, I want hallucinatory terrain,
oh yeah,
um, at play. And so I was looking through and kind of digging into that because the problem with a spell like that is some of your characters might save. And so, three people walk in and they realize, oh, this is a candy filled wonderland. I love this place. Look at this gingerbread house. And one person is like, whoa, that's made out of bones. Whole thing's bones.
yeah.
And then they have to talk about, we come to a decision point pretty quickly because of that. So, and it's even worse if only one of your people fails the save and everybody else is fine. um
Well, that's actually so interesting enough. Ready? So now let's
mhm.
talk about that. So in
Yes.
in psychological horror, there is the idea of the madness and paranoia story. So you're thinking you're psycho. And I would even go They Live. It kind of dips into this a little bit because there's only a couple of people who know the truth, right? And so then there's
Right.
that, right? The idea that something that your companions don't, that
Hmm.
and and they don't believe you, right? That's
Hmm.
that's a very
Right.
classic horror trope, and using those spells that create that illusion, right? Maybe you just have someone who just, like, for some reason they don't have to make that save, right?
Yeah.
In your party,
your
you're like,
your gnome or whatever just makes it.
for some
Yeah.
reason they don't
Uh-huh.
have to make that save, and so
Right.
so so then it becomes your gnome is seeing these things the rest of the party isn't, or not
Hmm.
seeing things that the rest of the party is, and so then it
Yes.
becomes the outsider.
Hmm.
And oh my god, yeah, no, that's so much
I
fun.
love that because you can have, NPCs that are being covered up somehow. So a bunch of the players can't actually engage with them. But, your person who saved is having this conversation. You can have phantasmal people who are in the real world monsters, and you can have the opposite, like just regular folks who look like monsters to your party. So there can be a lot of variance going on in there.
Hmm.
Having people running around not sure how to interact with everything and just buy into that because a horror game is about that buy in. So,
Yeah.
in a regular adventure we might be like, okay, so we talk them out of the illusion and then we move on. But in this one, let's play around with this a little bit. Let's see, this could be a fun part of the story. um I also wanted to jump in and just say that if you want to boost this, if you want more of your characters to fail, put this in a planar realm, put this in a manifest zone, like give illusion more heft here, give people disadvantage on these saves.
Yeah.
There's easy mechanics to do it, and you don't feel like you have to avoid those things if you have an illusions tale that you want to tell with your Halloween.
Yeah, and that's something interesting to talk about too, is manifest zones, or things where the separation between the planes is weaker.
It's Halloween.
Bavaria, right?
Barovia. Yeah.
Barovia. There we go. Barovia
Mhm.
is the perfect example. Barovia is everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
you Part of the idea, at least in Forgotten Realms, the idea of Barovia is that you can be walking down any road, and all of a sudden you walk through the mist and you're in Barovia, right? And I'm
Yep.
pretty sure it's pretty similar for like Greyhawk and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But you can put those small, like, you know small dimensions within any of your games, where it's like, oh,
Great.
even as an escape for your normal D&D game,
Hmm.
you can do something like a Curse of Strahd esque excursion adventure type of thing.
Yeah. And then just change it right there. Not only Barovia, but there's a bunch of demi planes of dread. And those are, for me, when I think about those as the horror movies. Like, this is the demi plane of dread where Friday the 13th happens. This is the one
Hmm.
where, and so when you head into that, these zones allow you to rewrite the rules a little bit. If you decide that in this zone, you want, you can only succeed on an illusion on a natural 20 or something, or, do something ridiculous, or, you have to be a gnome to pass or something like that.
Hmm.
You can do that stuff And our expectation is when you go back to reality, those rules are going to go away. Those only happen in these special circumstances. And I think you can make the mechanics match the play style you want
Hmm.
without just, hand waving and saying, we're telling a spooky story right now. So mechanics, are just what I say they are.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. Oh man. So good. So good. Yeah. Excuse me. And that just kind of got me thinking. You brought up the smaller planes, the Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, which brings us to one of my favorite horror subgenres, which is there's the killer, but then below that, let's get into the slashers.
Okay.
Slashers, I love more than anything. I could watch
Mhm.
slasher movies from morning till dawn. So the idea of the slasher film is that you are in a group, and there is a nigh invincible monster coming after you, and the invincible monster is smart, is fast, unseemingly
Mhm.
fast, um, yeah, and like I said, near invincible, right? So you
Right.
have your Jason Voorhees, your Leatherface, your Freddy Krueger's, and you can even go with the Scream idea of it too, because in those films, it's not just one person who's the ghost face killer; it's multiple people. So you can kind of have that same
Right.
same kind of feeling where you have one face that you're trying to avoid, and anytime you think you defeat it, you probably didn't. Um,
Right.
yeah, and bringing that into D&D, I think is interesting, and I don't think it's a long-term campaign. I think this is maybe
Mhm.
2 levels, 3 levels at most. I think this is maybe a one shot even, where
Sure.
having something that is clearly too powerful for the PCs come after them. You could use something
Mhm.
like you could even use a dragon and create that same kind of feeling of like they're being stalked by this red dragon that can shapeshift and that can
Yeah.
show up and teleport and do all these things, and their main prerogative is to survive until they figure out how to stop this creature, or until like
Right.
even just the end of the night, right? Like maybe it's just like
Mhm.
one day out of like every 632 years, this creature comes back, and your PCs have to deal with it because they just happen to be at the right place at the right time to run into this creature.
I mean, and so right? Xanathar's Guide to Everything has a ninth level spell called Illusory Dragon. And
Oh,
it only lasts for a minute, right? But it is 100% like the kind of spell you could have tied to a location at a
mhm.
time with a permanency spell. You can't interact with it, but it does like, psychic damage with its breath weapon. How do you stop that thing? How do you stop it from destroying the next town? If you want that story, there it is. And it's a much more compelling tale than the Phantasmal Killer, if that's the basis for your spell. That's a much weaker spell. I don't
Yeah,
find it quite as interesting, but Illusory Dragon, holy cow.
yeah, right. Yeah, that'd be a ton of fun.
But how
Um,
do you stop these things, right? That's a big part of
yeah,
these stories is
and that is
you
a big
can't
part.
defeat the slasher, right? You have to contain them,
You have to
escape.
contain, escape, right? You temporarily defeat them, right? You think of Halloween, and they thought they blew up Michael Myers at the end. Well,
Sure.
clearly they
Yeah.
didn't, right? Uh, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street. The only thing they can ever figure out is that just don't go to sleep, right? Well, that doesn't
Right.
work, right? So then they have to beat him at his own game, right? And that's the other way you can kind of go about this is you set it up against this powerful creature who has a set of rules as to why they do things.
Mhm.
More of your almost Hellraiser's more supernatural, but Hellraiser has set rules, and as so long as you can beat him at those rules, beat him at his own game, then you
Sure.
succeed, right? And that can also be an aspect. So you look at
Interesting.
Freddy Krueger, and you figure out how to control your own dreams, how to lucid dream essentially, and then
Yeah.
you can shut them down. Um,
Oh my gosh. This is so good because like this idea, this lucid dreaming, right? Again, just feels there's so many easy ways to build this because when you enter that dreamscape or whatever it is, when you enter the reality of these creatures, when you follow them to your demi plane of dread, there's so many Third Ed had all these like rich planar rules, like stuff about gravity. There's all sorts of rules about like this place has objective directional gravity versus subjective or none or light, and how does time work, and you can just build these in and start thinking about how to put these mechanics together to make your dream world weird, and specifically weird for your players so that they understand how it works.
Mhm.
I think going into a dream world and saying like it's a dream world and I'll make up the rules as we go doesn't give me as a player the kind of definition that I normally have in D&D. Like I know what I can do in D&D all the time. But if I told you that gravity is pretty subjective at this point, you can change what's down at any time. I can work with that and I can think about how my character would act within those rules. So check these out. You can search for planar traits pretty easily and kind of see some of these old ones that exist. We don't talk about them so much, but it's just such a cool rule set.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know, we talk about the psychological horror. Going back to that, you know, when
Mhm.
you think about survival, you could totally do a survival-esque horror campaign on a plane, right? You
Sure.
like, I mean, you could probably take you could take Avernus, right? You could probably take that book and convert it pretty easily to a survival horror type of thing where you're
Mhm.
a group of lost adventurers on one of these planes, and around every corner is some kind of terrible creature trying to defeat you. And
Right.
and the thing to think about though is how do you make it feel horror versus how do you make it feel like, you know, your normal D&D adventure where you're traversing the plains.
Sure.
um you know, and I think part of that is one, yeah, buy-in from players. You know, you tell them, you say, okay, really remember, you know, this is more the horror side of things, so let's kind of get to that way. And then you do things like, you know, like I said last week, like the very extended descriptions of the monsters to really get that feeling going.
Mhm.
And you throw monsters at them that are too hard for them to survive,
Mhm.
clearly, and then they have to, you know, use different tactics. Stealth, sometimes they just have to
Yep.
straight up run, sometimes
Mhm.
they have to distract it to try to get away, you know. You can always, and you can always use the bigger fish mentality too, right? Like, sure, they're totally fighting this creature and they're struggling to beat this creature, but they're going to beat it. All of a sudden the bigger
Mhm.
creature comes and just
The
wipes
bigger
that
one.
thing
Yeah.
out, right? You know, I mean, and that builds it because your
Mhm.
PCs are already, you're tattered and you know, beaten down, and they're going to win this fight, but this thing just sweeps in and does away with it like
Yeah.
nothing.
I love that idea because one of the I haven't played Avernus, but one of the criticisms that I hear often, I had to write this one into an adventure recently, is what if my characters are all super good and they don't want to make deals with devils? They don't want to, take they'll just say no. Why are they down here? Why don't they just go home? Well, if
Hmm.
you take that option away, if you make them lost down there and everything's terrifying, suddenly they do have to start making weird deals. And those are also things in some of these horror movies that I do like, that you find the creature who's not the lesser evil,
Yeah.
and you do have to work with them in order to achieve this major goal. And that's supposed to that's an opportunity to be creepy and be like,
Yeah.
this is a scary thing, but you have to work with them.
Let's take a jump over to the paranormal subgenre, right? You know, you
Oh,
go
okay.
into there and you look at the, you know, the devil demons in hell, right? The
Hmm.
and you know, and I mentioned Evil Dead a little bit, right? You know, that's a little bit of it because, you know,
Yeah.
you open the book, the Necronomicon, and then you're dealing with that. But you can even look at things like, oh man, what's that Keanu Reeves film where anyway, so somebody makes a deal with the devil, right? In any of those stories, I think it's the Devil's
Yeah.
Advocate, maybe.
Oh,
Uh,
Devil's Advocate. Yeah.
yeah, you can make deals with those creatures, and oh, and you know, one of my favorites, right? Hellraiser is very much in this genre. This is where Hellraiser probably lives, and the idea that you have to make these deals,
Mhm.
or oh, Constantine. Okay, yeah, no,
Yeah, that's a much better one. Yeah.
that's a much better one than Devil's Advocate. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
Constantine's a good one too, right? Because
Mhm.
in Constantine, he's dealing with the same thing. He's making deals with monsters and the occult to get these powers. I know the
Right.
comic much more than the movie, but you know, and that's the idea where you just have no choice. Like sometimes you
Right.
have to make a shitty deal to save the world,
Mhm.
and you know, and that's a very edge of your seat type of horror feeling, right?
Mhm.
um
Yeah, and I love it because that also I was thinking about Legends of Tomorrow, where the other characters in there are like, "You did Constantine, you did what? You made a deal with who? What did you know?" And
yeah,
there's always this back and forth between like what is, a character who is good, good, good versus a character who's like, "Look, there's a world I have to deal with right here."
yeah,
And it's kind of fun to put these characters underneath the kind of purveyance, I guess, the control of this Constantine.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah, DC, the DC modern TV shows, they have a couple of these things where you're dealing with demons, right? Because you have your Titans
Yeah.
where Raven's mother made a deal with a monster Tarragon, and
Hmm.
now she has these powers. So now part of her story is dealing with that, and that is a horror aspect in the superhero genre. So
Yeah.
when we talk about bringing horror into D&D, it doesn't have to be the entire thing. It can just be like a small subgenre or subsection of your entire campaign.
Right.
Um,
Let's quickly point out the dream spell, by the way, a good 5th level illusion, which affects one creature. It lasts for their entire sleep session. You can give them monstrous and terrifying dreams, sending a short message to them, and they wake up with some psychic damage. Like, that's a terrible curse for one player to have, and
Yeah.
everybody else trying to be like, they just had a normal night's sleep. They don't exactly know what the supernatural thing is. They see it affecting their friend, and that's going to make them want to investigate and help out. But yeah, they don't have to be in on the action exactly.
right? Yeah, and you could definitely do something interesting like that with the madness paranoia thing too, right? You could start, you know, in there's that Christopher Nolan movie Inception. Um, you could easily twist that slightly, and it becomes a horror
Mhm.
movie, right? In
Oh,
the
sure.
idea that you don't know what is real anymore and what isn't. You could easily bring that into D&D. Like, you could have half a session do something, and then all of a sudden everything's different, right? Or they realize they're asleep and then they wake up, or do they, right? Or do they in another
Mhm.
dream? And you can definitely do that type of thing, or even like with the planar jumping, right? Did we land on the prime material plane? Did we land on the right prime material plane? You know,
Yeah.
it it just adds a little bit of that fear into the game, and
Mhm.
that's yeah, that's what I'm all about.
Oh, what a fun way to shake things up too. Because it doesn't need to be like a Flashpoint style like event to still come back to your regular world, but some things are a little bit different and leave you wondering like what else is different.
Right? Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. Time travel is such an interesting thing too, because it can create those horror scenarios that you're
Mhm.
just kind of pointing out, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
your heroes had to go back in time to defeat Lolth before Lolth consumed, Shar's powers, and so now you've defeated Lolth. Well,
Mm.
how has the prime material plane changed? When you come back, and then
Yeah.
that becomes a little bit more that psychological horror where you're like, oh man,
Mhm.
what did I mess up, and how do I fix
Right.
it?
And I think you can do that, just like you were saying with Lolth. But when you meet these, I don't know, these scary figures, whatever they are, these ghostly figures, you don't have to battle them right then. Those demi-planes or whatever, you could go into their pasts. I mean, that's a big deal about Ravenloft, is you learn a lot about the past history of Strahd. Like, well, what if the event took you partially to the past and you just didn't really realize it?
Yeah,
Maybe you're just 10 years back. That's enough time for everything you've done as an adventurer to be changed.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, So you brought up Strahd, which vampires, we all know vampires. Vampires tend to be, there's a lot of ways to do vampires. I tend to like vampires more of the gothic kind of almost romantic type of storytelling where,
Sure.
and you can kind of do that where you give your players a patron, and that patron is a vampire, right? That's right.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And then slowly over time, they realize that they've been working for the vampire. And while it's not like jump out of your seat scary, it's a slow build of terror. Um, and then on the flip side of vampire is werewolf, right? So
Yeah.
werewolf becomes interesting, and I think you have some pretty good examples of werewolf that you've been tossing around.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Oh, I'm so excited. Starts
yeah,
next week.
yeah, and I don't want to get into any spoilers, but as to what we've talked about in that, but the general idea of like you look at some of the more classic werewolf movies, like what happens to our protagonist is they have a run in with a strange creature, and
Mhm.
then they start waking up in weird spots, right? Or they
Right.
wake up chained in cages, and they're covered in
Mhm.
blood, and
Yeah.
and then they have to figure out one how to remove this curse, but two how to prevent themselves from causing more damage. Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those the times when they're like, well, I'm gonna build myself a room to lock myself inside so that nothing happens. That gets really eerie, very creepy, very fast.
yeah,
Versus like the Teen Wolf, I just need to learn how to play basketball.
right.
Those are two different routes you could take, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You
Oh
know,
my
and
gosh. Yeah,
oh, go
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 ahead.
ahead.
I was just, thinking about the difference between these. Like, this is the difference between an active threat. Like, werewolves are so active. Like, you're going to
Uh-huh.
see there's effects, whether you're hunting them or you are one or whatever. The world is going to change around here. But the vampire change is so subtle. Like, it's a long
Hmm.
term sort of thing. I was just in my head thinking, like, what if your patron is this local member of the Harpers, and they're, everything you do makes them a little bit stronger, and their power grows, and they become like one of the heads of the Harpers, and then you discover that they are a vampire that you have just put in control of this like good organization. Wait, is it good anymore? Are they still good?
Are the Harpers
They put
still
their own
good?
people in. Yeah,
I you know
that would be fun.
I think they are. Oh man, you got all weird and digitally again on us. All right, well,
Oh no. Oh,
that's
sorry.
okay.
Did you hear the whole thing? Okay.
Oh no 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 no. Visually, you looked really weird there, and it was pretty great.
Oh, look
Um,
at me. I see it in the background there. Oh, that's
yeah.
cool. Cool.
Good and creepy. Um,
Sorry, I
yeah.
was talking about how I was a vampire just then,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
that's
So,
the
so,
natural.
so, so the mirrors didn't work. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah,
And I love classic monsters. I love the ideas of throwing those kinds of classic monsters at creatures. And one of the things that we do see a lot in D&D, especially in dungeons when you're dealing with like mad mages and stuff like that, are Prometheans or constructs, right?
sure.
Your flesh construct is your Promethean, is your Frankenstein's monster type of thing. I love the idea of using those classic horror ideas and and doing it in a way that um, is intimidating to the players, right? You throw a
Yeah.
flesh golem at a group of level 1 to 3 PCs, they're not going to be able to deal with it. And that's,
Mm-mm.
to them, it's this unstoppable creature. So you can even just have like a couple of adventures inside like a dungeon where just a Promethean's just following them.
Right, absolutely. And I love that. And this is another good opportunity to do a horror thing that I like a lot, which is the fear of the unknown. Like, you never say that's a flesh golem. Like, you could let the players say that themselves because they're D&D players, but you as the DM just saying, this creature, this amalgam with its, huge one muscly arm and stitches everywhere, you could be descriptive, and that description drives the theme that you're looking for home at the same time. So it does double duty right there. Like, you're making it more horrifying and keeping the players from knowing exactly what's happening. And I love that
Exactly.
stuff.
So good, so good. And kind of into monsters subgenre too. Let's talk about giant monsters. Giant monsters are really
Sure.
easy to do in D&D, and you just need to figure a way that makes them threatening enough. Like, a dragon is fine, but is that threatening enough to the players typically? Who knows? But you need a way of like, I think the Godzilla size monsters are going to be much better for this, right? The
I mean, yeah.
huge monsters where they're just crushing buildings.
Mhm.
And then what do you do as players, right?
Uh-huh. I
So
was just thinking about Detective Pikachu, a classic horror movie.
yeah,
Um, have you seen this movie?
I have. The lick tongue was terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. But the moment that's like I was actually like, oh no, was the moment the ground started shaking and you realize that the mountains, the hills they're on are actually huge Pokemons in this enormous garden, and they're falling off the edges. And those things, if they were active and terror, like, it was such a cool moment of the monster has torn itself from the earth and is going to go on a rampage. What are you going to do about it? It's 50 times as big as you are. What do you got?
Right. Exactly.
And that's not how that movie went, but that moment was very cool.
Yeah, and on the flip side of things, you can deal with small creatures too. Is a horrifying thing.
Yeah.
You think of gremlins and critters, right? They are these tiny,
Mhm.
terrifying creatures that can show up anywhere, and they show up in these massive swarms, and there's so little you can do about them. Right? What do you do then?
Right.
Right?
There's
That's
just so many.
exactly, and that's kind of an interesting idea too. Like I love the idea of, and I'm going to keep kind of going back to this because it's an easy trope. Is the adventurers are traveling through the woods and they're lost and they come across like a place to camp, and all of a sudden they're dealing with all these small creatures chasing them.
Yeah.
And at first they're going to try to fight them off, but they're just going to keep coming. You know,
Right.
and it's like, you know,
Oh gosh.
then you have to create some kind of action to where, you know, they're trying to escape them. They escape them for a little
Mhm.
bit to catch their breath, but then they start showing up again. It's like, and how do you eliminate that threat?
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
is it you
Where
have to
is
leave
the?
this territory, or do you have to go find
Oh,
the mother that's pushing all these out, right? How do you
I was
solve
just thinking
this?
about the staff of control weather that you need to get, and you need a lure to get them all to come out after midnight, and
Uh-huh.
then you make it rain on them after midnight, and that's it. But something like that, like some quest that you are on under pressure because you know, like first the quest is scary, and then second these things could just show up at any time and make it
Yeah,
worse.
yeah,
That's really fun.
yeah. No, and I love the idea of even using animals in general, not just small creatures, but
Mhm.
any kind of animals, right? Like in horror, like if you're on a boat, right, like dealing with the kraken can toy with your ship for days and days before it consumes it, right? So maybe
Yeah.
you know this legend, and then all of a sudden you notice your ship's getting, yeah, and then, you know, and then you
Oh.
can kind of use that to bring in like waves of Sahagin, right? Like, you know,
Mhm.
occasionally the Kraken like chases the Sahagin to your ship, and then you have to deal with that, right? And then you have that scene from
Right.
Aquaman, which was terrifying and amazing, where they're on the ship fighting off all the creatures. Um, or you could
That
even
was
go
good.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, even you can even go your party's being stalked by a pack of wolves,
Mhm.
right? That's horrifying. Like,
It is. It totally is.
you know,
And I remember some of that from the introduction to Strahd. There, you know, the constant howls in the distance, and us feeling like we got to find a safe place to camp because
mhm.
we're just out in the open. Like, what are we gonna do? I don't know how many wolves there are, and apparently some of the wolves can just turn into Strahd at any time, or they're Strahd's special wolves. Like, I don't know what that means.
Right?
They're
Yeah,
scary.
super scary. And I think really like it, you know, there's a lot more subgenres, but one of the easiest ones to bring into D&D for me is zombies, right?
Hmm.
Zombies are easy, right? You know,
Yeah.
they're it's such an interesting idea is that there's a zombie infection in a city, and it spreads fast, right? And Waterdeep, I think, is great for this. Baldur's Gate is great for this. Any kind of walled city, right? That has a walled city that has any kind of area with some kind of poverty in it, because that's an important thing to realize whenever you're thinking about zombies. Is it's going to spread a lot faster in that area, and if that
Yeah.
area becomes filled with it, then it's going to take over the more affluent areas, and that's, you know, if you listened last week, you know, talking about there's a lot of times in horror. There is political themes, there's morals, there's these types of things, and
Hmm.
that could be a very easy one. And I love the idea of there was a steampunk series of novels that dealt with zombies, and like the Bone Shaker was one of them, but I can't remember what the first one was. It might have been Bone Shaker, but the idea is that Seattle in that one becomes a walled
Yeah.
city and it's
Hmm.
completely locked up, so the zombies can't escape. And I could very easily see Waterdeep or Baldur's Gate or Candlekeep or any of these walled cities becoming that kind of situation where you're locked
Yeah.
inside with the zombies and you have to figure it out
Hmm.
because you don't want to open the gates because then this virus gets out. But
Right.
you also don't want to, you know, succumb to becoming a zombie. So, um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Could be one after, you know, after so much time they have almost broken out of the walled city, and yeah, all the city guards are protecting the areas to, like, you know, the center of the city, and
uh-huh.
the outskirts, like the low-lying sections, the lower markets, those are going to get swarmed unless you can go in and stop it somehow.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, and I think for that I would actually up the zombie curse too, right? Like
Mhm.
if you take damage, you know, you have to make the save. That's it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
If you go unconscious, you have you know, a maybe you have disadvantage, and then you can do tracks, right? So you don't immediately become a zombie, but like in
Right.
horror movies, like then you also have the, maybe you make these rolls in secret too, right?
Hmm.
So that you have the choice. Do you let your companions know that you're shifting, or do you just like keep fighting the good fight until you succumb, right?
Right. That's, you just send people texts like, all right, you're on track 2 out of 8, you know.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, that's, I mean, that's one of
Just
the great
update them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things about modern technology in D&D is being able to send those kinds of texts, or even doing die rolls on the online and sending like screenshots or something, right? You know, I'm super into it.
Oh,
So,
that's
or you
very
just
cool.
you just randomly ask for die rolls at the table, and then you let
Hmm.
people know, hey, by the way, that was a wisdom save. What'd you get?
Yeah, that's fair. Like this is such a good time to do the. All right, everybody, I need you to make you like roll 5 d20s at the start. I just need to write down what you get. All right, great.
Right.
Because then they'll never know what it's for, but you are actually using it for those zombie tracks. They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But
Oh man. Yeah. Was there any other cool like mechanic stuff that you wanted to touch on?
oh, there is one. I took a look at DM's Guild. There's a sale going on for the next 20 hours about just like different Halloween stuff. It's called Squash Your Fears. And there's a lot of like pumpkin themes going on in there. It's pretty funny. But there was a book called Codex Umbra, and it is 29 pages long, and it's a collection of new spell descriptions useful for horror. So all it is, it's just a list of all the spells in the player's handbook, and there's a sentence about each one of them that you could use instead.
Oh wow.
So, like the Bane spell, the affected creature's faces gain an illusory coating of black blood. Or let's see where I'm on C. Compelled Duel. The spell manifests with a voice that sounds like yours, making gruesome threats to the target. So these are just ways to like, I think, change how your spells look a little bit, which is a DM I would use against my players. In your skeletal hand, your hands turn into bones as they blast this cone of freezing ice out at you.
Yeah.
Um, let's see, conjure animals. I was just looking at. To you, the conjured animals all seem to be wearing collars of rusted iron with chains reaching out to a similar bracelet at your wrist. Um, I love this sort of just creepy addition to stuff. And I would even say, if you're doing one of these demi planes, just say this is how the spells work here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it when spells look a little bit differently, but are fundamentally mechanically the same.
Yeah. No, that's definitely getting back to the whole robust descriptions, right?
Hmm.
Like how describe what your spell looks like, and you describe it in such detail, in such creepy detail that it then becomes this whole other thing all on its own.
Right. My favorite spell in fifth edition is Hunger of Hadar,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's because of its description. It's so good, and it makes everybody just go like, "What? Whispering tentacles? No."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Evard's black tentacles is another one. You just brought up tentacles. Like that's a super creepy spell on its own.
Oh yeah, it totally is. Totally is. But it's just so much fun to kind of think about how these things could change a little bit so that, number one, again, you are kind of not letting the players be totally familiar with what's happening.
Hmm.
If I took a quick look at mage armor, I mean, how many different ways could you make mage armor creepy? What if
Oh yeah.
you target and dark red fluid oozes out of their pores and solidifies into a crust around them? I don't know what spell that is if someone just said that's what happens, but that's just mage
That
armor.
Oh man, that's so good. And that's one of the things like to remember about horror in general is that it doesn't play fair.
Hmm.
That's something really worth remembering whenever you're
Yeah.
you're doing these things is remember you don't have to play fair, especially with horror, right? The idea is that the heroes should be able to find a way through, right? You're not out to
Hmm.
kill them, but you're out to instill a level of you know uncomfort, fear that forces them a little bit out of their comfort zone and makes them examine their choices a little bit further, right?
Right.
And and even sometimes something simple like you did the spell descriptions, or even adding extra saves like I mentioned with the
Hmm.
zombies, or having things that are immune to things that nothing should be immune to, like horned helms, or no, horror. I can't remember. So there are these creatures in D&D. They're essentially just these suits of armor that are animated. I want to say
Okay.
Helm
Okay.
Tor. There we go, Helm Tor.
Oh yeah, that sounds right.
Helm
Mhm.
Tors are immune to force damage, right? That's
Nothing's
terrifying.
supposed to be immune to force. Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's
It's your go-to.
terrifying, right? Like,
Mhm.
recently in my home game, we're doing Dungeon and Mad Mage, and our warlock sent his Eldritch Blasts flying at this creature, and the Eldritch Blast just
Mhm.
tear everything up, and it didn't
Yeah.
even phase the creatures, right? And so that little bit, right, even though it's not a horror campaign, that little bit, like widening of the eyes and like, oh,
Right.
why? How do we take care of this thing, right? So don't
Mm.
play fair, but
Mhm.
be fair, right? You know, there's the kind of that
Right.
balance, right? Um,
Right. I'm thinking about like The Walking Dead. One of the things about that is like everything does the humans do, sure, makes the zombies more aware of them. Like we could hide here and maybe they won't come, but if I need to go get anything, like if I need to go find more food, that's going to provoke them. That's
yeah.
your characters are often walking around in the darkness with the only light source in the region, and of course that makes them a target to everything, right? It's
Uh,
not that you're being unfair, but the circumstances are unfair. They're totally
yeah.
against you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Oh man, I love the idea of putting a little bit more horror into my D&D. And I'm I'm running Dungeon and Mad variation of Dungeon and Mad
Yeah.
Mage, and I could say it now, like, there's definitely going to be like a certain amount of like the giant monster that's going to be involved at some point.
Mhm.
It's already been hinted at pretty plainly, so any of my players in the chat, like, guys know. um and then on top of that, like, they've already made deals with
Yeah.
demons. I don't play fair all the time. Well, I mean, I play fair, but the circumstances aren't fair, right? Like, exactly like
Right.
you said.
Right.
um and so, yeah, it's fun to put your adventures on their heels a little bit.
Mhm.
Most D&D campaigns are kind of written from the perspective of the heroes are going to be the heroes, and I love the idea that the heroes aren't necessarily going to be the heroes. The heroes have to work to become the heroes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
Mm.
tends to be where, like, of course, from level one they are big damn heroes in comparison to other people,
Yeah.
compared to common people, but they aren't the heroes. They should become the heroes of the story at the very end of the campaign.
Right.
That's the trajectory.
Yeah. Right
um
now, it's just surviving. It's just getting through.
exactly, right.
You're making me really excited because my next, I don't think it's spoilers to say this if anyone's checking it out. But our next kids campaign is starting this week, I guess tomorrow, and the city goes dark basically, and it's an extended period of like full on darkness, so they can see 60 feet. And I mean, a lot of them have dark vision. They knew it was coming because I gave out descriptions of the seasons early on. So a couple of our warlocks did take Devil's Sight, and that'll be helpful. But it's dark, not starlight dark, not moonlight dark, like dark dark. um and so I want to build in that feeling where they are like, shoot, what's around this corner? I don't know. I am a little bit scared walking through the biggest city in the world. It's still going to be a scary experience, and I'm pretty excited for that.
I
It's the Halloween spooky I wanted.
Oh man, I know it's an annoying glitch a little bit, and we're gonna work on it, but it is pretty fun when you essentially disappear and we just see bits of you, you across over the background. It's so weird.
I see me right here, it's fine.
Oh
I
man,
wonder what that is. That's so funny.
yeah, and honestly, it's probably just network noise because you're
Mhm.
because of where you live. Um,
I'm a or I'm a ghost. I don't know.
or
Wow,
you're a
look at that.
ghost,
There
or
I am.
you're a
I'm back.
vampire, right? All right. So I think that about wraps up our series on horror for this week.
Mhm.
Join us tomorrow as we hopefully finish up The Fighter.
Yes.
Thanks for being patient last week. We I needed the night off because of work. So tentatively, we're planning for tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. finishing up the Fighter Deep Delve. And Rich, I think you have a Kickstarter to talk about.
I do. Let's see. Game Theory in the Age of Chaos wraps up on Tuesday. So you can check that out and get a book, a retrospective, I suppose, at this point, of the last 4 years in politics, and learn a whole lot about game theory in the process. You can pick it up with the Kickstarter, which is, I don't know, 1,000% funded or more at this point. So the other thing you can do is go to Stark.vote, and you can learn about alternative ways to kind of like help fight for democracy and get the book for free at the same time,
Awesome.
which is very cool. Earlier today, there's also a long. If you want to listen to me and Mike talk about politics for a while, that video is online right now. I have to find it still. It got shared during this
Oh,
broadcast.
okay. Well, yeah, check on Twitter for that. I'm sure Mike has
Yeah.
posted about it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're watching this here live with us on Twitch, thanks for hanging out. Make
Yeah.
sure to like and subscribe so that you know when we go live. For those of us watching us later on YouTube, make sure to subscribe so you know when we post new videos. And maybe swing by some Sunday and hop on and join the conversation over here on Twitch and chat with us and let us know what you think about the subjects. But yeah, I think that's it. So we will see you next time.